Hey y'all, Morgan Rector here. Do you have an idea for a podcast? Furthermore, would you like to host and co-produce your own podcast? I am always looking to expand the portfolio of my company, Leader One Podcast Network. If you would like to have your own show, send me an email and we can talk about it. Aside from politics and religion, I'm open to just about any topic. If you are passionate, knowledgeable, and articulate, I want to talk to you. You can contact me by email, morgansvariety@gmail.com. I hope to hear from you soon. Hey, Morgan Rector here. I'm just dropping a line to say thank you to all of my Patreon donors. Since I'm not a Joe Rogan or Mark Maron, podcasting is more or less a starving artist gig for guys like me. Patreon donations keep me from having to take a job that would take away from my ability to generate more Human Monsters content. The website URL for Patreon is www.patreon, that's spelled patreon.com/leader ONE, Leader One. A way to make a one-time donation is to send it through PayPal at Morgan Rector 331, Rector spelled RECTOR, at hotmail.com, Morgan Rector 331 at hotmail.com. You don't have to give a large amount of money if it isn't possible. If $1 a month or $1 one time is the best you can pony up, it would be gratefully accepted. I know how hard things are for everybody during COVID. Thank you for all the support you have given the show, whether it is through financial donations or simply by listening. I am grateful for all you have given to me and the program. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Human Monsters. I'm Morgan Rector. I was so scared, I begged Jesus to take me out of this world. Bill Haynes, former inmate of the Florida Industrial School for Boys. History. The Dozier School for Boys was officially opened on January 1st, 1900. In 1914, the name was changed to the Florida Industrial School for Boys at Marianna. There was little in Florida in terms of institutions for wayward youth. It was the hope and intention of lawmakers that this institution would provide appropriate facilities and programs for the housing, education, employment training, work, and rehabilitation of its charges. On average, the boys ranged in age from 9 to 18. However benign and objective, life for the boys at this school was inhumane. To quote a legislative committee report published in 1903, inmates in iron, just as common criminals. To quote a report published in 1911, the inmates were at times unnecessarily and brutally punished, the instrument of punishment being a leather strap fastened to a wooden handle. The boys were slaves. They were frequently leased out for free labor. It was part of their punishment for winding up at the facility, despite the fact that not all the boys were delinquents. Many of them were simply just wards of the state due to being orphans. If they failed to perform to the level of an adult while on work assignments, which was not uncommon since many of them were not yet 12 years of age. They would receive savage beatings, like typical slaves. Most of their time was spent working. Whether inside or outside, they raked leaves, cleaned toilets, did dishes, pretty much anything. The school grew its own produce on a farm, so many of the boys were forced to work the field under the blazing Florida sun. Many of the boys were shackled together as chain gangs to maintain control and prevent escape. Another punishment, reminiscent of medieval tortures, was to chain the boys to the wall. The students at this school endured the same horrors that were typical in any foster system in the United States or, for that matter, anywhere in the world. The property was dangled above boys who had lost hope for a future free of abuse. There was something about this governmental, state-regulated building that implied the promise of accountability. In the orphanages and foster homes, there were no officials to monitor the situation and penalize anyone who mistreated a child. The stuffed suits of the administration came across as the closest any of these boys would come to being appropriately parented. This image was illusory. The reality of life for boys within this institution was that they were subjected to every kind of abuse. As if the physical and sexual abuse were not traumatic enough, the boys experienced traumatic psychological terrorism by the sadistic staff. The commute to the building was but an hours-long respite, temporary relief before the horrors that were to come. Their lives were sandwiched between torture chambers. The chemistry was tragically harmonious. The vulnerable were tossed into the clutches of those whose dubious evidence of strength was gleaned from defeating the defenseless, wielding a weaponized and unassailable imbalance of power. The trauma was so damaging, the surviving victims were discharged with an envy for the dead. Some of the institution's charges died while in custody and were buried in an ad hoc potter's field. Even the privilege of a marked grave was deemed a luxury by the Florida Industrial School for Boys. One occasion, when a boy on laundry detail was ornery with staff, the official ordered the other boys in the laundry department to put the recalcitrant boy in a tumble dryer. The searing heat and the jostling were too much for him, and it brought about his untimely demise. His ultimate fate would be to be buried among the anonymous dead in the institution's cemetery of unmarked graves. It's hard to imagine in 2021, but there was a time when there was little to no concern in society for children who were shuffled through the system. Once, in the earlier half of the 20th century, when a judge was sentencing orphans to a term in reform school, he dispatched them with the remark, "You damn orphan kids are nothing more to me than a herd of caribou." The school was notorious to boys who were immersed in the system. They were more frightened of it than they were of adult maximum security prison. The dread and terror they felt was warranted. In some cases, the inmate would search their mind for a means to escape or commit suicide before being dragged through the doors upon arrival. As far as first impressions go, a foul and overwhelming stench permeated the building's halls. Before becoming inured to it, some of the boys would struggle to breathe past it until they nearly fainted. Fainting would not have been in their best interests. The escort bringing them in the building would have grabbed them by the throat and propelled them forward. Any reaction against the vice grip around their throat would have been met with a punch in the head or worse. If the boy fell to the floor and got a bloody nose, they were picked up and marched off to their sleeping quarters. Upon arrival, the room contained a bunk bed and a pillow without a case, very much like a prison cell. The boys were segregated by race, with whites and blacks housed in separate cottages. The black dorms were remembered as being in considerable disrepair. Black boys experienced racism on top of the other forms of abuse. They were frequently addressed by staff using racial epithets. According to reports by lawmakers submitted in 1911 and 1913, the black children lived in conditions reminiscent of a convict camp. They worked all day and slept two to a cot. The cots had no mattresses. The sleeping facilities were not ventilated, which contributed to a decline in their state of overall health. Arriving in their sleeping quarters for the first time, the new boys would be dropped on the floor and then ordered to get on the bed and face the wall. If the staff had their druthers, they would order the boy to move his hands to the top of the bed and grab the headboard's bar. A leather strap would be stored under the pillow. This strap had become folklore among boys who had done time there. Legend had it that the strap was made of two lengths of leather linked by a strip of sheet metal. The strapping was administered with dramatic effect, as the boy was left to wait for it, the dread mounting within him. He would have good reason to dread the beating, as it was typically worse than anticipated. It wasn't just dealt to the buttocks. The boy would be struck anywhere, including the face, and he would be lashed so hard he would bleed. He would be warned that if he tried to wriggle out of their clutches and avoid the blows that were being dealt, they would only start the procedure all over again, and the operation would be just as devoid of mercy as before. They would even issue death threats if the boy did not remain still and accept his torture. They would lash the boy until he was screaming bloody murder. There was no prescription for the mathematics of this punishment. The number of lashings and the amount of time dedicated to the task depended on the individual. The degree of sadism and cruelty was reflective of their individual personality. The boy would be stricken with such brutality for so long, they struggled to sit or stand in the aftermath. Sometimes the injuries from these beatings were so severe, the boy would require stitches. When they weren't being beaten in their dorm rooms, they were taken to a common space that was designated as the spot where most of the physical abuse was dealt. There were blood stains on the walls, floor, and even the ceiling. There was a bed on which the boy would be ordered to serve himself up to the torturer. The mattress absorbed the blood, saliva, mucus, urine, and feces of all the boys who had been beaten there, and they were legion. There were tiny segments of human tongues and lips on the walls. To quote Bill Haynes, "Your hind end would be black as a crow. It had a crust over it. Your shorts would be embedded into your skin and would have to be pulled out. And when they pulled them out, it hurts even worse." This kind of beating might follow an infraction like using profanity, but one didn't need to commit a transgression that serious to suffer those torments. It could simply happen according to the dictates of the torturer's whim, based on their personal proclivities. For instance, a boy could be beaten for whistling if a member of the staff didn't take a shine to it. The school employed a psychologist, but like all the other staff, Dr. Curry felt no compassion for the boys. There was no talk therapy employed to help the boys come to terms with the traumas of their pasts. Dr. Curry was more fascinated by the boys' sexual proclivities and practices. He would sit the boys down in his office and ask them questions like, "How many times have you fucked your mother? How many times do you jack off each day? I want you to show me how you masturbate." The boys were threatened or insulted when they were reluctant or defiant in reaction to this line of questioning. Many of them were ordered to masturbate in front of him, which was a humiliation of the highest order, as he eyed their bodies like a side of beef. The only relief from the regular beatings and other tortures came on Sunday, when the boys were dressed in suits and marched down to the White House Chapel for religious services. They would hear about their merciful and benevolent God as they were trapped in a veritable hell on earth. The typical morning routine began when a bugle was played. The boys were required to dress and then line up in pairs to be marched to the dining hall for breakfast. After the morning meal, some attended school classes, while others attended to their work detail. The black boys did not attend school. Everything was scheduled so that there was little time for anything else, and they could keep the devil's workshop closed. It was stressful for the boys to perform their duties in a frenzy. They knew that if they did not complete a task, a brutal beating was sure to follow. The boys were so exhausted at the end of the day that all they could bring themselves to do was shower and collapse into bed. Autonomy was taboo. The boys were expressly instructed not to think for themselves. They were told when they could eat, when they could drink, when they could use the washroom, when to bathe. It was complete draconian rule. The showers were timed. If a boy took too long in the shower, or if he committed any other infraction in there, he would be beaten with a garden hose or worse. Occasionally a boy might try to run away, but if there were guards or other staff nearby, they would tackle him and beat him with their fists. Boys were frequently beaten black, blue, and bloody by grown men until they were in so much pain they could barely stand. Retaliation for breaking rules was motivated by personal animus on the part of the disciplinarians. They were not just punishing the boys. They were exacting revenge. The only recreation that was allowed was sports. Most of the sporting events were positive for the boys' morale and physical health. The one exception was boxing, which for the faint of heart just meant that they would receive another beating. Only in that context, humiliation was baked into the experience, since there was an audience. The following is a press release issued directly to the governor of Florida and to the general public by an attorney representing the United States Department of Justice regarding the Florida Industrial School for Boys and the abuses suffered by its students. There are certain accomplishments each of us wish to complete during the course of our lives. There is always a beginning, middle, and hopefully a successful ending. For the last several months, we have done our utmost to expose the beatings, floggings, rapes, and possible murders of as few as 32 and possibly many more children while in the care of the state of Florida in the 1950s and 60s. Few people want to remember, or even care for that matter, that these children's lives meant nothing. Each one of these was a young child, and each now lies in their forgotten grave, hidden away in the thick underbrush of the North Florida woods. We have pleaded, screamed, and cried for these abandoned children, and now are demanding to know who they were. We have presented this story on television, radio, and it has been published in more than 60 newspapers. We humbly hope and ask that the governor of the state of Florida will carry forth our cause and bring justice to these children and bring peace to their families. We know in our hearts that the governor is the type of man who will fight for what is right and just for these forgotten children. We sincerely believe the governor and others understand the importance of this matter, and that those children lying in those unmarked graves deserve the same consideration and respect that all children should have. Our elected officials have a legal responsibility and a moral obligation to correct the injustices these children and others have endured as wards of the state of Florida. We ourselves, as victims of the abuse while at the Florida Industrial School for Boys at Marianna, beseech the public and the media to demand an accounting and identification immediately before. Once again the underbrush covers their graves, and they are again forgotten. It is imperative that those who inflicted the abuse and even caused the death upon innocent children be held accountable for these atrocities. The White House Boys Organization respectfully requests the Governor of the State of Florida and the United States Department of Justice order and conduct a full investigation into the deaths of these children. We sincerely hope and believe the Governor will find a true sense of justice and urgency in ordering that these graves be opened and the identities of these forgotten children finally be revealed, and that a proper burial be conducted. In the past history of the state of Florida, they have made a concerted effort to identify the remains of early settlers, sunken ships, and many remains, and bounty pulled from the surrounding shores of Florida. These children deserve no less respect. We implore the Governor not to waste another day in bringing closure to this past travesty, and finally make an effort to give peace to all who suffered at the Florida Industrial School for Boys. This is the text from a speech given by former inmate Roger Dean Kaiser about his experience in the Florida Industrial School for Boys. As I stand here before you today, the White House torture chamber less than 4 feet behind me, it is strange that the only word that comes to my mind is the word masturbate. Between matron Mother Winters at the orphanage and Dr. Robert Curry, the psychologist you hired to straighten we boys out, that was the only word I ever heard come from these two individuals' mouths. During the first 12 years of my life, that seemed to be the most important thing the state of Florida wanted to know about me. It was bad enough never having had a real mother, but to have to sit through that type of degrading language was scary and disgusting. Governor, I have always wanted to say those words to you. The term reform school is supposed to be a positive place, not a negative. You, the state of Florida, became my parents by an order of the court and placed me in a Jacksonville, Florida orphanage. You, not I, chose to make that decision. I, being only 4 or 5 years old, had no choice in the matter. You had a responsibility to teach and prepare me for a life outside the orphanage. For 7 years, you are the one who allowed me to sit on the end of my bed with only a single broken roller skate wheel to play with. For 7 years, I sat there rocking back and forth on the end of my bed, my mind wasting away, while I spun that single roller skate wheel around and around more than 100 million times. When I was not spinning that wheel, I was over at Mother Winter's room, laying naked, my little head on her bare chest, while she had me masturbate her. But because I took one of the girls' bicycles from the dormitory, climbed a tree now and then, and went to the bathroom or got a drink of water without asking permission, you sent me away to this ungodly place. Whatever goodness might have been left of me at the age of 12, you finally destroyed by beating the pure living hell out of me. You almost killed me. When I exited this damn building, I was so bloody that no one could recognize me. I walked into the bathroom in Mr. Hatton's office, and I screamed in horror when I saw nothing more than a bloody monster in the mirror. Shaking and screaming, I begged Matron Mother Winters to please come and save me from you bastards. I'll help you masturbate, Mother Winters. Really I will, and I won't complain ever again. You caused me to beg for my molester to come and save me. That's what you did to me. Gentlemen, today, almost 50 years later, I now stand before you, and I am still not sure if this building will ever allow me to smile. But that's not the worst of it all. A secret, inner hatred of society and a fear of my fellow man will forever be instilled and kept secretly hidden deep inside of me because of this White House building, the Florida Industrial School for Boys at Mariana, Dr. Robert Curry, Mr. Hatton, and Mr. Troy Tidwell. Was my secretly riding one of the girls' bikes without the orphanage matron's permission, or climbing up a thin, tall pine tree, or stealing a candy bar from the patio restaurant because I was hungry, worth the price the state of Florida made me pay? I was not a murderer, a rapist, or a burglar. I was a danger to no one other than maybe myself. As a child, I had never hurt anyone, not even under the slightest of terrible circumstances. I was just an innocent, confused, incorrigible, hungry, unwanted, and unloved young boy who needed someone to let him know that he had a value to someone, somewhere in the world. My entire adult life, those 2 horrendous beatings at the White House, have been very difficult battles to deal with. One moment loving children, animals, and most of humanity. The next moment, a temper exploding into a fit of rage, trying to protect myself from those who probably do not wish to harm me. But I cannot afford to take such a chance ever again. I stand here today in remembrance of all the boys who were beaten, raped, and abused by this facility. But one that I will remember the most will be the boy who had his skin whipped off his back in one chunk from his shoulders to his knees. I don't know how many boys were killed here, and I don't know if that will ever be known, but I do know this. Many a good little boy walked into this damn torture building, but a lot more little Charlie Mansons walked back out than did good little boys. You should be ashamed of yourselves. I can only pray that things have changed for the children of today. Many morbid rumors about the treatment and deaths of boys abound years after the closure of the so-called White House. One woman who was 90 years old at the time she told her story said that her deceased husband, a former employee of the facility, would bring home boys from the school. This had nothing to do with bestowing upon the troubled youth the comforts of a real home and a meal made with love. Rather, Her husband would molest the boy and kill him by plunging an ice pick through his head. Many other people came forward with stories about the institution's charges being murdered and plowed under the fields of Jackson County. One credible source was a retired Army Ranger who says he witnessed 3 separate incidents of the dead bodies of boys being removed from the White House. There are 31 unmarked and undocumented graves in the North Floridian forest. Speculation has it that these graves are the resting places of boys once incarcerated at the Florida Industrial School for Boys. Someone recounted a ghastly tale about a boy being taken to the torture chamber for a beating that was so severe, part of his testicles were severed by the leather strap. The following is an interview with victims of the Florida Industrial School for Boys on PBS's The Aware Show.
The Florida School for Boys, also known as the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys, opened its doors January 1st, 1900. Dozier was a reform school operated by the state of Florida in the quiet panhandle town of Marianna, officially nicknamed the City of Southern Charm. Unfortunately, the boys who were incarcerated at Dozier were not recipients of such Southern hospitality. Throughout its 111-year history, Dozier gained a reputation for alleged abuse, beatings, rapes, torture, and even murder of students by the staff. According to some reports, despite periodic investigations, changes of leadership, and even promises to improve, the allegations of brutality and torture continued. The Florida Department of Justice closed Dozier in 2011. But still open are the emotional wounds for scores of boys, now men, who live to tell their stories and the stories of dozens of others buried at Dozier without a voice. Joining me in the studio now are 2 gentlemen who are survivors of Dozier. They are known as the White House Boys. Mr. Robert Straley is a spokesperson for the White House Boys and has worked tirelessly to organize survivors of Dozier. And next we have Mr. Andrew Puel, who is also known for his efforts to support survivors and be a voice for those who were not so fortunate. Both men have written books about their experiences and are seeking justice for those who were victims of the abuse at Dozier as well. Thank you, 2 men, for joining us.
Thank
Robert,
you.
Andrew, for being so courageous to be spokespersons for what happened to you and what you believe happened at Dozier School. We certainly appreciate you for joining us here for the Aware Show to talk to our viewers about what your experiences were, where we are right now with the investigation as far as you know, and any other information you want to share with us on behalf of those who are not able to be here for one reason or the other. I'm going to start with you, Robert. How did you come to be an inmate at Dozier School for Boys?
I kept running away from home. My mother was bipolar and very abusive. I was bipolar. And when I hit puberty, somebody had to go. It wasn't going to be her. And I started running away. And then when I got in the juvenile home, I didn't really care much for it there and ran away from the juvenile home 3 times. On the 3rd time, when they caught me, they put me in a constricted area. And the next thing I knew, I was being put in a van and on my way to Marianna. I looked around and I was struck by the beauty of the place to begin with. I thought it looked like a school or a college campus because there was rows of brick buildings, 4 cottages, they were red brick, and they had plants all the way around them, trimmed, everything was neatly trimmed. It looked like it had just been mowed, tall pine trees, elms and oak. It was beautiful, and I thought, gosh, you know, I could stay here.
And once again, how old were you? What year was this?
This was 1963, towards the end of summer. I was 13. I was rather small for my age, weighed 105 pounds. just missed getting into the little boys' cottage. They put me into Tyler Cottage, which was, I guess, would have been 13 to 15.
So you were with older inmates as well?
I was the smallest boy there, and I could tell at the minute I got in there. They gave us state-issued clothes, which was a white t-shirt, blue pants, and brogans, which was a kind of a boot. And I went into the cottage, and right away the boys started pushing me around, you know, and letting you know where your place was in the pecking order, you know. So I went outside, and there was 4 boys sitting on a bench in state clothes. Now, you could have your own clothes if your parents would send them up. So I went over there and sat next to them. They were talking about running away because all they could see was a woods, you know, and they thought they could just run all night and evade these people and not get caught. And they asked me if I wanted to go, and I said, no, I've been on the run for 3 weeks, and it's not as much fun as you would think. I'm going to stay here a while, you know. However, there was a snitch behind us and turned us in at 8 o'clock that night. Troy Tidwell, it was a one-armed man, and R.W. Hatton, who was a slim man but one of the worst beaters there. And I believe they took one of the big cottage boys with us in case somebody couldn't hold the bed or something like that. And we were taken into a black sedan and driven over just a block away to the White House. And it was a long, narrow building. You went in a side door. They lined you up against the wall, and then they took you through a doorway. There was a fan up there, a large industrial fan, and they would turn it on. It made a huge racket. I was at the end of the line, which was not good. You wanted to be at the first of the line to get in and get it over with. Otherwise, you were going to hear everything till those boys were beaten. And they took the first boy in, and you could hear grunts and then groans, and then that turned into screams, and just, oh, God help me, Mama, you know, and just noises I'd never heard before. People in real pain, you know, and I guess you would have had to have been a person that was in war or an ambulance attendant or something like that to really hear people screaming like that. And the first boy came out, and his eyes was wide. He'd been crying. His face was chalk white. His hands was buried in his crotch, you know, and he was walking stiff. And he was in shock. Now, I didn't know what shock was at that time, you know, and that's how it went. And by the time they got to me, I was in shock from hearing this, and they just led me in there. It was like being in a dream that you couldn't stop for some reason. They took me in, and there was a army cot, an old army cot, and you placed your hands on the rails, turn your head to the side, don't let go over the rail, don't set up, don't scream, or we'll give you more, you know.
Let me stop you right there before you go any further. Your story is riveting. I just want to take a moment to caution our viewers. These are the stories and the opinions of Mr. Robert Straley and Mr. Andrew Puhl, and we are talking about the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys. But I do want to say a couple of things. These are allegations that have been made, and the latter thing that I want to make sure we put out here is that viewer discretion is advised, as our stories could be graphic to some degree and in nature. So we just want to make sure that we put that out there. And I didn't want to interrupt you, but as you're going into the story and I'm listening to the details of it, you know, we're compelled to make sure that we let our viewers know those things right off the top.
Can you go back? Off pretty shortly.
Well, we're going to get you've got time. I want you to tell your story. This is your story. It's not mine.
Right.
But we need our viewers to understand that these are still under investigation. They're allegations to some degree. But please do finish. Whatever your... Yes,
Robert,
sure.
That happened to you the very first day you were there?
My first day, yes.
My, that must have been horrible.
Well, it was an eye-opener, that's for sure. And so I got down on the bed, and this one-armed man, Mr. Tidwell, started beating me. I couldn't see what he was beating me with. The first 7 or 8 licks was so hard, it knocked me down this far into the bed. And I thought, what am I being hit with? You know, a 2x4? You know, I couldn't imagine. And I was stupid enough to let go of the rail and turn around and take a quick look, and it looked like a barber strap. You know, at first was my first impression. And so immediately when I did that, they jumped on me. And I got maybe 10 more licks. I think I got 35 or 40 lashes, you know.
Your first day?
First,
again, I mean,
first night there, you know, hello. And then they took us back to the cottage, and we went and got in the shower, ripped our underwear off, just boxer shorts, and I went in there, took a shower, new boxer shorts, to bed. You know, that was my first day. And I thought, oh my God, I've stepped into a beautiful hell.
Wow. We're going to get to some of your other stories because that was just your first day, but you have at least 2 more.
Yes.
Huge parts of the story that you want to tell from your personal experience, but I want to give Andrew a chance to kind of chime in with your first day. When did you first get to Dozier, and why were you there?
I vandalized my school, and it was here in Pensacola. Because it's funny, my niece the other day, she was showing me Facebook, old Warrington people, and they brought up the crime that I did almost 49 years ago. And
So what year was this?
66.
Okay.
So I'm thinking, you know, do you ever outlive your...
40 years ago.
Yeah, 49 years ago.
49 years ago.
And people are still talking about the
vandalism at the school.
Yeah, I turned the fire hoses on into school, and it flooded the school, and people were
basically being mischievous.
You know, it was the stupid thing to do.
How old were you?
16.
16.
Older than Robert, and it embarrassed my family, and of course, having your kids sent away to a reform school. Matter of fact, the newspaper made said their smirks wiped off their faces. Mariana is no bed of roses. So I mean, the community knew. I think Mariana was set up to be kind of a scared straight kind of thing. You ever see these TV
so if you knew you were going off to Mariana, whoa, you is basically what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Tell us a little bit more about what happened to you on your first day there.
Well, my first day, we got there late in the afternoon, and the funny thing about the first day was they put insecticide on you to kill lice or something, and we went to Chipola Junior College to see a play that the college was putting on. I thought, well, this is interesting, you know, going to a play at the college. But the next day was my learning curve at the school, because that you're sent down to get your school, what grade you're going to be. They figure what grade you're going to be in, and then you work one day and you go to school one day, and then you go get your physical, and you get your vaccination shots. So we were told to take all our clothes off, and there was this little
black guy,
little black kid, maybe 12 or 13 years old, and he became sexually excited, and the doctor walked by and grabbed his private parts and kind of giggled as he did it. You know, the doctor, like it was a joke or something. And about 10 minutes later, the doctor came to give the boy his vaccination shots, and the boy started freaking out. And he said, the boy's saying, no, 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 and he's crouching down, and he's backing up and trying to get away from the needle and the doctor. And the doctor grabbed him up and just started slapping him, and he said, shut up, shut up, shut up. So I'm sitting there just terrified. Never been away from home before, came from a good family, and realize I have just made some serious mistakes. You know.
And you can't go back. How long were you there?
I was only there 4.5 months. at that moment, I became just extremely focused. I said, how do I get out of here? What do I got to do to get out of this place? And I just became focused on that one thing. And to this day, I can focus on one thing like so intently, like this White House Boys thing. I've been on this since 2009. But sometimes if you give me a whole bunch of things to do, I kind of get confused. So I feel like I think that attribute of mine, or that's not an attribute, but that condition I have, I think it dates back to October 12th, 1966.
When you focused on that one thing, getting out of there.
Get out. How am I going to get out of here? Mm-hmm. And
well, you've been doing a lot of work, including writing a book. We're going to get to some of that in just a moment, but I want to come back to you, Robert, because as you allege, two other incidents happened to you, some of them very graphic in nature, just warning our viewers. Tell us a little bit more.
You're talking about the hospital. I was a hospital boy there. Now, I don't know how I got this cushy job, because it wasn't a good job. You were inside, and you'd have to go out and do work in the sun, hard work or anything like that. Your duties were just mopping the floor twice a day, processing new boys, which is getting urine samples and stool samples, and then they would hand you a needle and they would fill it up, but you would be the one to give the shots, you know. You would help the doctor set a broken leg or lance a hematoma or do stitches. And
you were a nurse? How did you know to do it? You were taught to do this?
I was taught, yes,
okay.
And I took to it. I mean, you know, it seemed interesting to me. I was thinking, okay, oh, Dr. Kildare, this is good, you know.
Okay.
And they dressed you up. You went every day. You went into a little room and changed into hospital whites, you know. And we did do some procedures, and it was interesting. The other boy that worked there couldn't deal with the blood. You know, he'd faint. You know, like we had one boy that had a hematoma. It was as big as my fist, and when the doctor lanced it, it went clean to the ceiling. You know, and that was a mess to clean up, you know. But what happened to me there that I'll never forget, it was mostly just the same old thing, you know, day after day and so forth. But I came in one morning, and I saw a boy lying in a bed, you know, close to the end. And as I got closer, I saw that he was shaking, you know, just shaking like this, you know, and he was crying. And I noticed that he had towels on him, and they were all blood-soaked, you know, and I thought, oh boy. And I had seen a couple of the big boys, and I'm talking about the 16, 17-year-old boys that had gotten a bad beating, you know, for running. When you ran, you got 100 lashes. You know, that's serious. You're talking about a whip that weighed as much as a baseball bat. It was this thick. It was double ply with a sheet metal insert. It was this wide and probably that long. There, you know, you had the ceiling, and they would just tick that ceiling, you know, and it was swung overhead as hard as a man could swing it. And you know, most of them were big men. You know, Troy Tidwell may have had one arm, but that one arm was huge, big arm, strong, you know. So I went up to the nurse, changed my clothes, went up to the nurse, and she said, okay, go in there and clean that boy up, and then mop the floor, you know, and put the bloody towels in the bucket, set the bucket in the room, you know. So I went over to him, and I got a small and thin, not very deep metal pan and some peroxide, and I half and half that, half peroxide, half water. And I got over to him, and I kind of put my arm in, and I said, I took the towels off, and he was moaning and groaning, and, you know, I said, I'm going to lift you up just a little bit and slide this tray under you, or try to, you know. And he was young. He was maybe a year older than I weighed 105. He might have weighed 115 pounds. He had a very youthful boy's face. Nice looking kid, you know. And when I took those towels off, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because I had never seen anybody beaten that bad. where his skin was gone. You know, on his buttocks was like raw hamburger meat, if you can imagine that, being red, blue, bloody, you know, and just a mess, you know, and it shocked me. You know, I thought, oh my God, you know, this could happen to you. And when I put my arm under him, and he grabbed my arm like I was his mom or God or somebody, and just wouldn't let go of it, and he shook and shook and cried, and I tried to be as gentle as I could, and wished him with that, and patted him with a towel, and he screamed a little bit, you know, because it hurt, and then I took Vaseline and put on him, you know, to help him heal, and then rewrapped him with the towels, but he had my arm the whole time, and I tried to ask him, what is your name, you know, and he just kept shaking, you know, and it was so traumatic, it even had me crying at that point, you know, because I felt so bad for this kid, and I thought, all I could think of was, they could do this to you. You know, I'd never seen it that bad. And so the next day I came in, it was the same thing. And the third day I came in, he was gone. And you didn't ask questions, you know. And usually boys that were beaten, got the 100 lash beating, they would put them maybe in the hospital for a little bit and doctor them up, and then they would put them up to isolation. And there was a doctor there named Dr. Souza who actually made his own medical potion by going over to the slaughterhouse, extracting red bone marrow from the cows and mixing it with something, which we believe might have been Thorazine, because the boys that drank this potion said, well, I don't hardly remember what happened. It was just a haze, you know. And of course that was totally illegal. I called the FDA, Federal Food and Drug Administration, about it. You know, and they said that would have been illegal back then. You can't do that to juveniles. And so they either took him there, or if he was in deep shock. You know, I talked about this to a couple of doctors that I go to, and because I wanted to know what, you know, that was like. And they may have taken him to Chattahoochee, which is the mental hospital. It was also a hospital.
But you really don't know what
or
happened to him.
Or they might have killed him.
But you don't.
I don't know, because when you're there, when you're in that big of a shape with shock, when shock is that great, you know, it could either kill you or it could stay with you for a long time, and you come out of it not quite right. Well, they can't send you home like that, although they did do that, you know, to boys. So I don't know what happened to him.
A lot of what you're saying is based on what you say you witnessed and what you experienced, and some of what you say is what you believe or what you kind of speculate.
It's conjecture, yeah.
Right.
I don't know
Right.
if they did take him up to isolation. I don't really know what happened to him, you know, but it was just a dramatic and event that I'll never forget, that boy's face.
I see. Let me ask you this now. You know, I don't know how far you want to go with this, but you did disclose that you had the brutal beatings of yourself, and I wanted to dive a little bit, or to go a little bit deeper into that, because you were talking about rape and sexual abuse that allegedly went on at Dozier. You say that allegedly happened to you.
It did, and I was actually beaten twice more by Tidwell and a pockmarked faced man who I never knew who he was. He only seemed to be there at night. And Tidwell came in and sat down on the edge of my bed and grabbed me by the arm and took me into another room and told me, you were smoking, and if you tell me you weren't, you're going down. Well, I was going down, you know, and they beat me about 25 lashes and told me, hold that rail and quit crying and don't scream. And, you know, they did that twice, and that was so horrible in the middle of the night, just to have these coming and not even another boy with you for comfort, you know, being taken down by these two men that you just thought were monsters. You know, I was only 13. You know, I'd never been in a fight and never got sick, and I didn't know anything about pain, you know, let alone brutality. And then one night they came in, and all I felt was a hand around my mouth, and before I knew it, I was out of there just like that. And they put me in a car, and I thought, oh, here we go again. They're going to beat me again, you know. But they went to some place, and it was dark, and I couldn't see anything. And at that time, by the administration building where the White House was, it was a little bit lit up, you know. And they took me out, and they took me down a set of stairs. They had a flashlight, and they opened a key and took me in the room, you know. And that was so bad that I couldn't describe the nitty-gritty details
I wouldn't want you
to. I can't even go there. My mind won't let me go there. But what I can remember is Tidwell on his knees on my back, and I could feel the little bones in my body crunching, and I thought, oh my God, they're going to kill me. And the next thing I knew, I saw the cottage lights in the distance, and they were hazy and orange colored and were swinging back and forth, you know. And when I was deposed, I told them this to the FDLE, and a girl that was typing stopped, and she said, like you were being carried? And I said, yeah, I never thought of that, you know. And didn't realize it, but she was more than just typing. She was also a psychoanalyst of some sort. And I don't remember them taking me to bed. I remember getting up. I was very sore.
I understand.
You know, and my chest hurt, you know.
I understand. Let me say this. You've mentioned a couple of names, including Tidwell and a doctor. And I just want to say that these men have not been charged, have not been convicted of any crimes.
I was 13. I was a year over the hill.
Right. I just want to say that they are innocent, and in this conversation, it is your experience of what happened to you and what you say.
I was
but
devastated when I found out you had
Right.
to be 12 or under.
I got you.
You know, because rape of 12 and under and capital murder, that's all they get you for now.
Right.
You know, because of statute of limitations and sovereign immunity.
Right.
But Dee Dee, the FDLE did seem to go out of their way to try to discredit Robert's story.
And I don't want to do that here on the Aware Show.
No, I'm not comparing
Right.
you to that.
I got
I'm
you.
just saying, you know, the statute of limitations, like Robert mentioned, was passed on the sexual abuse and the physical abuse and everything else. But it seemed like they kind of went out of their way to even downplay the sexual abuse, like they tried to discredit the people that reported it. And, you know, people that report sexual abuse, a man to report sexual abuse, it takes a whole bunch of courage. I mean, it's a courageous thing. The guys.
Very much so. Very much
And
so.
I can
I wasn't
congratulate.
the only one.
Yes.
Remember Captain Nelson?
Yes.
He was a man.
Again, the names.
Yeah.
Let's just be leery of.
Oh,
You know, this was a victim. This was a victim.
right,
And he got
right.
right up there, and he was a big man, you know, and working on a boat. Tough guy, you could tell. And he just said, yeah, you know, I was raped there. I was 11 years old, and I
Well, there
felt
are a
like I
number-
should open my mouth about it.
There are a number of stories.
And I just thought, gosh, you know, I can't hardly even say that, you know. And I thought he was so brave to bring that out. There was something in the hospital that happened that I didn't tell you about, and that was about the guards. I went in there one day, and it was raining. It was raining hard, and I was getting soaking wet, you know. And I went in there and went into the little linen closet and stripped my wet clothes off and started putting on my hospital whites. And I hear the door open on the side. There was a side entrance, and in come two guards. They had their raincoats on and stamping their feet, and I could hear their lighters flick open, and they lit cigarettes. I was standing behind a door that was louvered. In other words, it was slats. You know, you couldn't see through it, but you could certainly hear through it. You know, you see those a lot in Florida. So I was as close as I am to you, to the man that had his back to me that was lighting up a cigarette. And he said, well, you know, that boy that ran last night, you know, I think he's going to end up in the swamp because they've really had it with him. you know, and the other guy said, yeah, he said, you know, he's being really ornery, and I don't know how many times it makes it that he's run, but he's going to end up in that swamp. He's not coming back. And they said it so casually, and I put my hand up to my mouth because I was afraid they'd hear me breathing, you know, because they knew I had heard that. That would have been the end of me, you know. And that was a very long 5 or 6 minutes or 10 minutes, however long it was, that I was just paralyzed with fear. But I knew then that these whispers and tales of throwing kids in the swamp that the kids were talking about were true, because they didn't know I was there, and they were just talking.
I see.
Dee Dee, can I add something to
Absolutely,
Robert's
Andrew.
story? I've known kind of as the White House Boys researcher. I've done, and one of the research I did was I went through the student ledgers from 1937 to 1961 and wrote down every boy that escaped, all the information it had about him, and his escape, and then.
And you have some of that
yes,
information.
I have that here. It's well, I don't know how well people can see it at home, but there's 169 names of boys who ran away, and it supposedly successfully escaped. And so, but the only reason I could go to 1961 because juvenile records in the state of Florida are sealed for 50 years, and it's meant to protect the juveniles, you know, so they can go on, live a life and not have that record following them. But the way it's turned out is it's also protected Florida, because what happened, the thing, Robert, the two
Incidents.
guards,
Yeah, yes.
2 guards, that was 1964. And if that boy was killed and they put down in the records he ran away, well, we can't go over there and look at the ledgers until, for that's volume 9, until July the 23rd, 2016. That's 15, 16 months away from now.
And some of them even longer, because some of those
some of the
reportedly
ones we've heard, like a death in 1980, we can't look at that until 2034.
So it's kind of difficult, you're saying, to maybe collaborate or
Yes.
corroborate some of the
Yes.
stories, because you're unable to.
Unless they
get
were
the
able to
records.
hide the boys some other way, or you know, doctor the ledgers or something, I don't know. But I would hope, like an attorney watching this program would maybe help. We don't have any money. Robert's probably out of money. I'm out of money, and we need an attorney to help us to get into these records, because I believe if there's a smoking gun, they're in the ledgers, the 60, the student ledgers. You know, a boy probably ran away, and now the FDLE would say, well, how do you know they didn't?
We can't say what they would say, but I understand what you're saying.
They said this to me.
Okay.
They said, how do you know they didn't run away and change their name? And I said, well, I don't know that, you know, but I don't know how many kids are really experienced in creating a new Social Security number, a new ID, you know. I don't think many kids are really that sophisticated to create a new identity.
I gotcha. Let's quickly get back to the White House Boys, because that's what you all call your organization, and you helped to establish it. The White House being what you all say was the torture chamber. Tell us more about the organization that you've established under that name, and what you've been doing now since.
Well, it happened in the strangest way. I got a call from a former secretary and #1 girl on the road. I had a road business, and Monica Smucker lives in Indiana. And we were talking, and we talked about the Martin Anderson case. That was a black boy that went into a boot camp in the morning, came out dead in the afternoon. And he actually was given a lethal dose of ammonia. and they had 4 guards and a nurse standing over him. You probably have heard of that story. And they went to court, and nothing happened, you know. And I blurted out, I said, you know, Monica, I was in a place like that.
So you wanted to start an organization?
I went ahead and told her about it, and she said, well, you got to do something. Okay. And I said, you know, Monica, it was 50 years ago. Well, that wasn't good enough for her. She Googles up Roger Kaiser the very next day, and there's a picture of the White House and a description of Roger Kaiser's beating and his email address. I looked at that, and
so what was your motivation behind actually starting, or you all starting the White House Boys?
We first had to meet, and once we did, we had to ask each other. I said, do you think they're still doing this? Did you ever hear about them stopping? No, you know. So we decided we would, the newspaper, we would go to the press on this. It had to be more than just me and him. I said, you know, this place has been open 100 years. There's got to be a trail of evidence somewhere. And we started searching. We went to the Florida Archives, the Florida Memory Collection, the Florida Criminal Archives, and we found that there was a huge, long list of people, clean back to their very first inspection in 1903, when they found boys as young as 8 in step chains that had to do a man's work in the field. If he didn't, he was thrown down and beaten brutally and unnecessarily.
I want to get to some of that, and we're going to run down on time here if we don't quickly move along here. So I don't mean to be rude to you, but there's so much to talk about.
There is.
And if we don't move along, we're going to miss some of it. So you decided that you wanted to do something to help be a voice for, of course, victims.
Yes, we wanted to get it to the paper, and we got it. Michael O. McCarthy happened to be a journalist and got our letter, took it to Carol Marvin Miller. She researched it.
Okay. Have you been back to Mariana since?
Yes,
any of this?
6 times.
Okay. And what's your first impression when you went back?
Well, the very first thing is when we went during what they called the sealing of the White House ceremony, when Carol Marvin Miller broke her story.
Okay, how did you feel?
It was a surrealistic day.
And how about you, Andrew?
I went back and I took a video camera because I was going to go over to do some research, and I went on the campus with a video camera and went into one of the old cottages, the ones I thought I was in, and I wanted to videotape myself I wanted to see what my emotions was going to be like. I started hyperventilating, and it was like something. All these memories were coming back, and it was quite have you ever seen that video, Robert?
I think so, yeah.
It was an interesting, I just wanted to record my own emotions.
I see. You call yourselves the White House Boys, and I get that from what I've researched and in talking to you all, but you also say that what you believe happened to black boys who were there was even worse.
Absolutely. They did all the grunt work. They were on the side where all the cattle had to be slaughtered and taken care of. They had all the chickens and all of the crops, you know, and all of the work. That was hard in the sun, in the fields, you know, whereas on the other side we had the radio shop and the bricklaying shop and electronics shop and this, that, and the other, you know, where you could actually learn a little something. Unless you wanted to be a farmer, you know, you really weren't going to learn much over there.
I see.
And they were beaten pretty badly as well.
From what you've heard.
Yes.
And I understand that the school was desegregated in the late 1960s and that sort of thing. Let me kind of go here with this now. You say being in Mariana at that time was how involved do you all believe people who lived near the school? What do you think they knew about? Do you think they were aware of what was going on?
They were more than aware.
Or had they? Or do you believe? How would you know that? You can't just
we know
say
it. We know it in several different ways. They encircled that town in a ring of silence. You did not. This is what one. Well, 3 ladies told me the same thing, calling in and talking to me. They said, you don't talk about the boys or what happened to them to strangers, because if you did, your barn could get burnt, your cattle could be poisoned, or you might get hit in the head by a hunter's stray bullet. And she said, by the way, that's the word out today. And whenever a boy ran, they went boy hunting. The farmers jumped in their trucks and took off, and these boys never really had a chance. What they saw woods, and they thought they would run all night, but they were going to have to run across roads and across railroad tracks, and these men would just be sitting there in their trucks with their lights out waiting on them, and then they'd catch them, And one man, Calvin Creamer, made a statement that chilled my blood and everybody else that's ever heard it. There was a place worse than the White House, and it was in the piney woods of Florida. He said, quote, "Back then it was torture for the boys. They were mean men to begin with. When they caught them, they'd strip them and tie them over 55-gallon steel drums bare naked, and then they'd beat them, and the police didn't care either." And I thought to myself, trying to imagine being stripped naked with a bunch of big rough farmers, and that was bad. But what was really bad, and I didn't think about it for days later, we had the luxury of being knocked down a foot into that bed. We had a mattress and springs absorbing some of the blows. These boys were beaten against steel, naked. They would not have gotten out of there without permanent damage or death. I will believe that. I stand behind that. They can call me a liar all day long, but I believe that.
You also believe that people may have turned a blind eye to some of this because because you allege they benefited from what was going on.
If you didn't work there, you had a relative that worked there. We're talking about a small town, and this employed 160 people. And yes, there was people that quit over the beatings. There were people that objected to it. The rest, jobs were scarce. You were going to do that, or you were going to find yourself out in the fields under the hot sun picking some farmer's produce. And so people put up with it. I know that Elmore Bryant and he was a former mayor, he made a statement late. The last thing he said really bothered me. He said, a lot of bad things happened to the boys and to the staff there as well. People are afraid. And I thought, what did they do to the staff?
You believe the people who are, and you can chime in as well, Andrew, you all believe that some of the residents in Marianna benefited financially.
Yes, absolutely. They were skimming off that farm. I've seen some reports, and when I look at them and I look at the figures, they don't look right to me. You're talking about a 1,000-acre farm that made millions of dollars. They put out produce by the ton. They had
and back
beef.
then, that's a lot of money, $1 million.
Yes,
yeah.
They had beef, they had pigs, they had lumber, they had every kind of produce you could think of, sugar cane, gosh, they had everything going that they could get. A brick plant that spewed out 20,000 bricks a day, and this was all done by the labor. And they actually changed the law back around 1907. Judge Milton changed the law to where they could send you up there on an indeterminate sentence to be approved by the men that ran the school. In other words, they could keep you there as long as they wanted to, and they could also pick boys up for smaller things like incorrigible, truancy, shoplifting, small crimes. They'd send them up there because they had this great farm going, but they needed a lot of labor.
Including
and this started back in
plantations,
2007, or I'm sorry, 1907. By 1915 or 1918, that farm was really cranking it out. And it continued to do that because they had the men up there to do it. One man called me, he was a black guy, an old man, and he said, I got picked up for truancy. And I said, how long were you there? And he said, 5 years. And I said, did they beat you? And he said, yeah. He said, I never could understand why they beat me like they did because I never stole nothing. Mm-hmm. And I thought, how sad.
Well, you all, and I guess, and I'm saying that because it's your experience and your stories, but it's been told by others that some of the boys who were there were not necessarily wayward boys. They were boys who were orphaned. So
Yeah.
just
Yes.
not having
Just
family.
didn't have no family that wanted them.
There was a man that made a comment about there were no orphans there. There were no boys for truancy. These were all the worst of the worst, you know. And I thought, baloney, this has got to be a way to prove that. And I went into the archives again, and it took me a week, and I found a set of photographs that a man had taken over a decade, 47 photographs, and I counted 170 boys under 12, and I realized how many boys are not in the picture. Then I found some other evidence that, and we learned that they had thousands of boys up there, little boys. I'm talking about 5, 6 years old, up 7, 8 years old. You got pictures of them. You know, the man has pictures of them. They're right on my web page. You look at them and they're like little 5 or 6 year old boys. What did they do to get up there? How did they get there? How did they get out? You know, and anybody could go up there and parole a boy out just by signing his name.
Yeah.
So it makes you wonder, you know, and that bothers me greatly to think of the amount of little boys they had.
I interviewed one guy for my book, and he was from the city of Mariana, and him and his brother, the little brother didn't get sent to Mariana, but he got sent to Mariana. You know what his crime was? They took 2 Coca-Colas off the back of a truck, and he ended up spending 5 years in Mariana, you know, for stealing a Coca-Cola. And he was also sexually molested by a staff member, and he was under 12. So there's no statute of limitations on that crime, but they didn't really, they said this happened in '52. So they said the perpetrator's probably dead. But they didn't really look to see if he was really dead, because I found a bunch of information on, because he gave the FDLE the last name of the man, and I found him in the Yellow Jacket. The Yellow Jacket is the newspaper from the school.
You've been also doing a lot of other research, because amongst your papers there you have names that have different colors, and you've done a whole schematic, and so you've been doing some research. Tell us about what you have
Well,
there.
I'm trying to find this list of runaway boys, if they survived, you know, past the date of their escape. And I usually do most of my research up here on College Boulevard, 9th Avenue at the Genealogy Library. And you can see I color code them. If it's green or orange, green is they definitely survived. I found a Social Security death index, or I found they got married or they went into the military.
So you would give them colors based on your research and the categories
for
your own little schematics there. But I just wanted to bring that up because obviously you've been doing a great deal of research.
It's very tedious. It's extremely tedious work.
You both have written books. Tell us a little bit about, you've been telling us about your books with your stories and with those of those who are not here to tell theirs. You obviously were inspired to put these in book form. Tell us about your books.
Well, the book I wrote with Roger Kaiser, one of the 4 original White House boys. This is kind of a rebuttal to the FDLE's report. I did the first thing that made me want to write it was I didn't like the way what I reported, how they reported it. Like, you know, I told you about the doctor grabbing the boy's private parts. Well, they didn't even put that in my statement. When I told it to the FDLE said, well, that could be, the doctor could always claim that was just part of the examination.
I gotcha.
And then I didn't like the way they treated Robert, and I didn't like the way they treated Roger.
Right. Well, we don't have any members of the FDLE here to talk about this, but I will say that this is ongoing investigation that's going on here. Robert, tell us about your books.
Our book, and Mrs. Boys at the Dark, story of betrayal and redemption in the Deep South. Robin Gabby Fisher is a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, and she quit and started in writing, and she's read several books. This is seen through the eyes of me and Michael O. McCarthy.
Okay.
We couldn't mention Roger because he had a book out, see. And what this book talks about is from the day that we met to how we met, how he got the story to Carol Marvin Miller, how they had the sealing of the White House ceremony where they apologized. They had a plaque. We got there, there's 50, 60 people in front of the White House.
Who apologized?
The state of Florida.
Okay. I just wanted
I'm
to,
sorry, it was the DJJ,
Okay.
Department of Juvenile Justice, brought us up there. They knew a storm was coming. The story had broke. And they brought us up there. We had a ceremony. They unveiled a plaque. We acknowledged the tribulations of the boys. They planted a tree, and for their suffering, they let us go through the White House. And the last thing they did was take us over to the 31
the White
unmarked
House,
graves.
as in the White House at the
Yes,
school?
they opened it up, and you could hear them say, oh my God, it must be true, you know, because the place looks like a torture chamber. And that's exactly what they were doing in there. And then the last thing they did is they took us over to the 31 unmarked graves on the black side. Now, when we left, Mary Zansky, the superintendent that had been so nice to us, had to step down. Gus Barrero was fired. They tried to ruin him politically, you know. And that was when the last thing that we did was Michael stood on the steps of Tallahassee and asked the governor for the investigation, and that was it.
And I understand former Governor Charlie Crist was very instrumental. Instrumental in getting this going, and also Senator Bill Nelson has
Bill Nelson wants
in.
the DOJ to step in, and I agree with him totally.
Okay.
Because when they do, they can show up at somebody's house with their badge and say, "We'd like to talk to you."
Right.
Former
Let
employee.
me say this. Several bodies have been discovered, as we know, with the exhumation of graves on the property and that sort of thing. They have discovered several bodies, and that's been ongoing.
24.
Many more than what
24 more than the FDLE said that 31. This was the only graveyard. There are no more graves. Yada yada yada. And Kimberly, Professor Aaron Kimberly, found them in a week and a half after the USF got their permit to go in and inspect the cemetery, because when they closed Dozier, it became a historic cemetery. And she went in and found it, and found there wasn't 31 bodies under there. They were all in a woods, hidden from sight, totally.
And that too is ongoing investigation.
That is ongoing, the one that really just, to me, is the last straw is there was a boy up in Pennsylvania that she felt had been murdered. And she went up there and talked to the family and asked if she could exhume the body. And it was a small town. Everybody was there, from the mayor to the fire chief to the police chief. They brought the casket up, or they dug down to it. She opened the lid. There was no body in there. There was just boards weighted down, right? And she took every board out because some of the remains there was nothing but teeth and jawbone, you know, in the cemetery that she'd found, Boot Hill as they call it. And she took every board out. There was nothing there. She even took the bottom out down to where somebody's grandmother was buried. They buried the boy on top of the grandmother. So, you know, the boards and the coffin hardware matched exactly to the coffins that they had found in the Boot Hill Cemetery.
But no body.
No body.
I see. Where are you all, the two of you and your organization, the White House Boys, where do you want to see all this go in just a few minutes? Because we're getting ready to wind down here with about 3 minutes left. Where does all of your work go? Because you've been at this for decades.
I want Professor Aaron Kimberly to wrap it up. You know, she is a brilliant woman, and with she has 10 pages of credentials. And she will wrap it up in a way that the story is told. She'll put an ending to it, and that will be it, you know. And this 7-year thing has gotten to be just torturous for us will end.
And what are you hoping will come from this, Andrew?
I'm hoping that, I think it's been proved without a shadow of a doubt that Florida was negligent in the running of that reform school. And I think the men should be compensated. And Robert told me that we've already had 80 White House boys die since this has started. I know several of them right now that have cancer. Many of them are living in poverty, and I think they should be compensated. I think Florida should do the right thing and just compensate these men for the treatment they received when they were supposed to be being reformed. I would like to say one story. One boy I interviewed, well, a man I interviewed, he was beat in the White House, and he got back to his hometown, and he actually planned on going back with this other boy that had been beaten in the White House and murdering the people that abused him. There's something wrong with the reform school that turns teenage boys into having thoughts of murder.
And there are stories of some of the products of this school going on to have a number of aggressive types of behavior and issues and that
One
sort
woman
of thing.
called me and she says, I now know why my husband beat me and my daughter so badly. And I said, oh, your husband was at Mariana? And she said, no, his father was. This was like throwing a rock in a pond. It just burned through generations, you know.
Well, on your website, there are several stories of gentlemen who ended up either incarcerated, kicked out of the military, or a number of other aggressive
end up
issues.
with
Andrew?
rage.
Excuse me, Andrew.
Dee Dee, those two boys went into the military instead of going up and murdering their abusers. So it turned out to be a good story.
I'm glad you finished that, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but I'm really trying to get you guys to
Wrap it up.
kind of, no, not necessarily wrap it up, but utilize the time that we have, because an hour has gone by so quickly.
That was quick.
I will give you an opportunity to have a closing comment before. I think we have about a minute and a half left.
I think Andrew is right. I think they should give some compensation to those boys because they really were damaged for life. They were left with rage problems. Those beatings left you with anger problems, if not rage. And an apology from the governor, and put this behind us, and let it be a lesson that when you hand unlimited power and a whip to anybody, it's not going to turn out right.
All right. Andrew, final words.
Well, one thing I would like to say is when I interviewed the boys, I had a lot of anger in me, and I can see the anger in my writing, but I would like to say that I believe the FDLE is an honest organization and honest lawmen. I think they did the best that they could do under very difficult circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, these were the stories of Robert Straley and Andrew Pugh. Courageous you are to come here and be on the Aware Show and talk with us, and we so appreciate it very much. We still say these are your stories and your views and your opinions. They don't reflect those of the station or those of anyone who put this show together, but we certainly wanted you to have a voice and a forum to tell your stories. Thank you once again for being here. If you would like more information about this particular organization, the White House Boys, we are providing that information there on your screen, and you can contact the organization here that these two men represent to get in touch with them, share your stories, or find out how you can support them in their efforts. Again, we thank them for being here. Now on Aware, we have joining us here in our studio, Mr. Elmore Bryant, a former mayor of Mariana, Florida, and also a former employee at the Dozier School for Boys. Next, we have Mr. Lewis Jennings, NAACP Director, Area 1 and 2. And also, joining us a little later on the show, we'll have Mr. Dale Landry, Chairman of the Florida State Conference NAACP Criminal and Justice Committee. He'll be joining us by phone. These men are community activists who have helped uncover the truth about Dozier. They have also played a significant role when the University of South Florida's Archaeology Department uncovered several graves on the property of Dozier. Well, tonight we will examine the community's reaction to Dozier. How has the tale of Dozier impacted Mariana, and what happens next? Where do we go from here? That and more to come. But for right now, welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us in our studio.
Thank you.
We'll start with you, Mr. Bryant, because as we mentioned in our opening, you've been the mayor of the school. You've worn really many hats in this area of Florida. But more specifically, want to get to you about you actually working at the school. Tell us when that was and what your experience was there.
I worked at the school in I started about 1991 and 92. I started as a dropout prevention teacher. Made the application, had no idea I was going to get a job. That was just the adult side. As a youngster, I played football at the football field at Dozier. So it kind of brought home many memories I had of walking the campus when I became a teacher. And I was very successful in what I did, appealing to young men who want to pass the GED and go back home with credits. And we found out that those young men who passed the GED seemed to stay out of trouble if they were able to be successful in doing that. And that was a good feeling for us.
Very good. Now, you're not new to what's been going on with the uncovering of bodies being found at the school, or graves, we should say, of the remains of boys who, some of which were allegedly killed. So what I want to bring home with you, Mr. Bryant, is you're aware of a lot of the historical hearsay, a lot of the historical fact, and that sort of thing. We want to turn to you for the African-American perspective now, if you will, because on our previous show, we had an opportunity to talk with two of the white men who were at the school and tell horror stories about their experience there. What do you know of what happened to boys who went to the school, particularly black boys?
To give the viewers a good understanding of how the campus was laid out, during those years of Dozier, it was segregated just like the public schools were. The north side of the campus is where the blacks were. The south side of the campus is where the white boys were stationed. The duties were a little different on the north side than they were on the south side. On the north side of the campus, the black boys farmed, they learned to lay bricks, and some of them became very skillful in masonry work. Some worked on the farms, raising farm animals. On the south side with the white boys, they mostly worked in the laundry. They did, when animals were killed, they did the procuring and worked in the slaughterhouses and that kind of thing. So as a kid, that was a fear of going to Dozier. I can't remember from the time I was old enough to go to elementary school, only one or two boys in our neighborhood actually went to Dozier on the black side. And that's what you would like for me to speak more from. There was a fear because of the one or two did go, talked about the beatings and the hard work, and the people in the community always would refer to that as to if we didn't behave, that we would end up at that reform school. So that was a growing up thing with us, and we watched how, at that time, this was before the years of the Bobby M. Years, there was no fence, and we knew something of fear had to be put in that many boys, the black boys, probably 200 or 300. There was no fence. They walked in groups. They went to the movies. They went to the bowling alleys. So listening at the 2 or 3 boys that had been, that was enough for us. And we decided.
But that doesn't sound bad to say they went to bowling alleys and, to the bowling alley and movies and things like that. I guess I'm not trying to make necessarily sound bad, but I'm just saying, from the sound of those kinds of things, it doesn't make it sound as though some of the allegations that.
Those are the good parts.
Okay.
Those are the good parts. And there were some good parts, and boys that didn't get in trouble when they were there, they enjoyed those good parts. But then there were some horror stories always were told by the 2 or 3 boys that went there. And of course, there's some things that we could see that actually worked, because we'd rather be in school every day, wherein those boys had to work on the farms and take care of those animals, and being away from their families. If they would run, that's when the boys really told you the horror stories of how they would turn the dogs loose on them. So it wasn't every they smile and howdy.
Well, they also talk about rape. They talk about torture.
Rape.
They talk about slavery. They talk about murder.
The slavery part came perhaps from I wasn't there, alleged to have happened that at certain times some of the officers there would take boys to their farm to work and they weren't paid anything. The next thing is they stopped that now, but they had a big market of growing pigs and cows, and they would disappear. So the boys didn't get to enjoy a lot of that because of it's alleged that they were walking away. Let me say that. So hard work and the trouble you met when you ran kept our minds on not going to Dozier.
Okay.
So it wasn't a picnic.
I got
We
you.
could find other places to have a picnic. Some boys really would come out and say, you don't want to go there. And we didn't want to go there. The old people had really put a fear in our minds about Dozier.
Mr. Jennings, to get you in this, being with the NAACP Area 1 and 2 in the area, tell us what you have found in talking with and or the historical perspective of what was going on with Dozier that you have heard and that your organization has been involved in up to this point.
Absolutely. Let me just start with this, Dee Dee. Say thank you for having us on the set this evening to talk about such an important topic as we now have learned and continue to learn through research and through our effort to try to uncover more of this tragedy story. And also let me say up front that I am not from Marietta, okay?
Yes.
In fact, I came to Florida from New Jersey, but just to be clear, I'm also originally from Alabama, so I'm not unaware of the miscarriage of justice that happened to our young black men, and especially in the South, and quite frankly, in some of our northern cities as well. But after coming to Florida and getting involved in the NAACP, and then becoming a part of the Florida State Conference Executive Committee as an area director, covering that particular area, and getting involved with people like Mr. Bryant, and learning the horror story of Dozier's School for Boys really is a chilling effect when you start to uncover that these young men were sent to this school for minor offenses. And the worst part of it is I found out through research and talking to people was that the family member didn't know what happened to their loved one after they left home to go to this school, who we've also found later that was either murdered or died, and they were buried in unknown graves and unmarked graves, and then just kind of forgot about. This, like they never existed, okay, until someone wanted to purchase that land for the Dozier School for Boys at a very reduced land value, if you will. And even then, there was no concern for the boys or consideration for the boys that were buried on this ground until the NAACP and other interest groups like the USF and other start to ask questions about this burial site, that became a very interesting topic now. What happened to a lot of the young boys? And that started this concern movement about the boys.
I see.
And let me add one point on. There are so few of leadership men in the community now. And I take my hat off to the president. I don't know what we'd do if it wasn't for the NAACP, what few we have left, because guys been there a long time like myself and Mr. Jennings coming up. We want to pass it on. But these guys came from all over the Panhandle and trying to, and they didn't have to do this, but like I said, very few leaders we have now. They came from Pensacola to all over the districts to meet in Marietta because we wanted to bring closure. Even before they came, Mr. Jennings, Mr. Landry came to Marietta to support me as I stood before the county commissioners, because there were some forces that was trying to push this as, no, we don't need an investigation. We don't need it. We already had one. But these gentlemen, and you can hardly find one man that will stand with you now. So my hat's off to this gentleman and Mr. Landry.
Our hats off to you.
They came and stood before that county commission in another county.
Right.
And some of these counties are dangerous. But they came and stood like men. They didn't have to do it. Because every time we've had trouble, it seemed like the brothers are very few. But they don't mind, if they are true NAACPers, they don't mind standing up. And I'm glad you called his attention to that, because I think about it. You know, these guys didn't have to come to me.
Right. Yeah, and thank you for that, Mr.
And
Bryant.
you especially don't want to come with the dangerous thing.
I want to get you turn back to some of the historical perspective and what we're seeing here today. Myself and our producer, Dr. Gail Fraser, and our director, Mike Rowan, had an opportunity to go on location to Marietta, Florida. And what you see on this campus, it's my personal experience as a journalist and just thinking as a mother and my child going to school. From the outside, it's very pristine. It looks clean. It looks nice, but that's from the fence. That was probably what some parents would have thought about their children going to their boys going to this school to supposedly correct wayward behavior. It was a reformatory school. But on the inside, what was going on, according to historical records and accounts, were very different. As we mentioned, horror stories coming out of here. So what you see today is on the white side, a very clean campus where things seem to be being very well kept. But on the side of where the blacks stayed, it is kind of dilapidated. Buildings are falling in, caving in. It doesn't seem to be as much going in to preserve what was going on there, even though that's the side where skeletal remains of several boys have been found. Do you know why we have that discrepancy of one side being well kept, the other side kind of falling in?
I love the comment was made by Mr. Jennings in a previous setting that you want to forget the dark side, and the black side was the dark side. So let's forget all this hard work. Let's forget all this raising the pig pens, and let's forget this. Here's a new school built over here, but there was no new school built on the right side. They built I believe it was a library on the last thing was built on that side, and that is being used now by Jackson County School Board. Pretty nice. But all the other buildings, they just let them go down because that was a story that we want to forget. It's the same principle that I find in the South that no, and that goes for big cities as well as small, no big city school systems wanted to build a new school where there was a black school. We want to forget this site here. Let's find a new place. So we don't want to build up over here. We want to forget this because you have the assume that there were bodies buried over there. You had, this was the place where the dirty work went on, and there was no new building. There was a new dentist's office and everything else on the other side. So let's build up this side, let that go. We want to forget this ever happened. And I appreciate him bringing out that comment like that.
Okay, sure.
Make one of
Go
the
ahead,
comments
Mr. Jones.
reference to the boards, and as we do our research and talking to various people that live this era, we finding that there is other information surfacing now reference to the secondary schools. Because we have always been told, and we've been looking at this from a standpoint of the young boy went to this reformatory school for misbehavior, even of the minors offense, but yet misbehaved. Now we are finding out through research and through other means that there may be another side to this story that we have not yet uncovered as it relates to the secondary school.
Right,
and we really want to thank Mr. Bryant for doing a lot of research and a lot of this uncovering in there. But I do want to end with one point that comes to mind when I think about Dr. Martin Luther King, who said in his day of preaching and teaching that freedom, and this thing kind of relates to the same thing when we talk about the dark side and we talk about why this side and why that side. Freedom has never been given by the oppressor, always demanded by the oppressed. And until you have people like Mr. Bryant and others standing in the gap and demanding that something is done, the oppressor just sweeps that under the rug, pretend that's never happened. That's a chapter closed. Y'all don't need to know about that.
I
you know what I mean? So.
I see. Mr. Bryant, coming back to you, we have Mr. Puel and Mr. Straley who came to the Aware Show and they told their stories, what they lived through. You've had an opportunity to meet some of the black boys who went to the school. What did they tell you about their experience there?
The Florida State Conference, NAACP, held a meeting at the site. And I think we have some pictures of that on the visit. That was where the first cottage is there, going up on the black side. They met under that tree, about 8 or 9 that came to Mariana that day. And you had to be a pretty tough cookie to listen to their stories. As this old man, the oldest one in that, I don't know if his name was George, I can't remember, but he was in his right mind, crippled all up, but he could point out the trails that he used to take and going to the pig pens, and what he saw.
And what did he tell you? I know that's
he was talking with the group.
Yes.
What he saw was sometime that was told to him, don't say anything, don't ask any questions. Then he said that looked like a hand in that pot going to the pig pen. He said he was told don't ask any questions, don't anything. Up the road from that, he pointed out, and I know he had to be right because I knew where it was. He pointed out the place where he was beat several times. And you'd have to be a pretty tough person, not for your heart to soften as they sat there under that big tree. And we visited that same spot. When you drive up on you did the a promotion piece on the other side in front of the fence. But right behind you, if you drive up the campus,
yes,
right to the end of the top of the hill, there's a big pine tree. That's where they all assembled, and each one got a chance to talk and tell their stories. And they could point, because I knew where the beating place was there. That was on the black side.
And if the white boys were saying that they were treated the way they were, we can only imagine. And they say that the black boys were treated even worse.
Even worse. I saw, we finished there, and then we went to the church and let them talk. Then we went to St. James Church and let them talk. And the next week we had some of them came back, and some of the whites came. And I saw grown men stand up and tell stories, and I saw the latest crying, and that's been, even though it's 20 years ago when that happened, there were many wet eyes, and they just listened to these guys tell their story. And so many guys were reluctant to come forward. But as it kept being in the paper, and the NAC people still trying to listen to both sides, we weren't taking sides, we listened to both sides trying to find some point of closure for this. It was just hard to sit through and not feel sorry for those guys after they told the story. And I just felt real good when there were so many obstacles they had to jump through, because a lot of people determined this wasn't going to go anywhere. This was just some guys running their mouth. But when they were recognized at the Capitol, and I was there to see it, and I had heard the same stories told right in my presence, and then at the Capitol, they was able to tell the governor and all, it was standing room only, these same black guys. It was amazing.
Don't want to just make the show top heavy to you, Mr. Bryant, but I do want us to make sure that we get an opportunity to reference some of the video that we did shoot on location in Marianna, Florida, to look at some of that video of the school itself. You, again, look at the black side and you see the dilapidated buildings and that sort of thing. But Mr. Bryant, you've had a chance to go in those buildings before they begin to cave in and have obviously become to a point where you can't go in anymore, or it wouldn't be certainly not encouraged for you to do that. You were able to go inside those buildings that I'm talking about right now. What would a person see if they were to be able to go inside from your eyes? You talked about some of the beautiful woodwork. You talked about some of the beautiful flooring that obviously these young men themselves
The masonry work
created.
in there is unbelievable. You couldn't afford to pay to do a house like they've done that. The material they used a lot of time was made. Even the furniture they used was made. You couldn't afford to pay a person do that kind of work in your house now. It'd be too expensive. They learned a lot of skills, and just to the north of that film that we drove all the way up, like we was going to a dead end.
Yes.
One of the most beautiful track fields was right over to the right. It's all grown up. Beautiful track field. There was basketball courts at each cottage. All those are gone away. When I was just coming out of college as a teacher, I was invited to speak out there because I would just start coaching. And one of the house parents asked me to come out and speak for some function they had at the dining hall. And a beautiful dining hall, all falling in. So what you would see is there a little left of the beautiful work on the walls, the material tables the boys made, and they still, in the back rooms, they haven't moved those out yet. They still have the double bunk beds that they use. And you know, there was no privacy. You had upstairs and downstairs, so anybody looking at the shots, you're going to take up the upstairs building. That's where the cottage parents live. Cottage parents live on one side, cottage parents on the other side. Downstairs where the boys live, one the cottage parent be on, one off. Now imagine housing 40, 50 boys by yourself and no fence. There was no fence then. So you will still see the signs of, there was names scribbled on the wall, and some of the work that was done and the things that they made there. But I just never liked to, even when my brother-in-law was working out there, I just never liked to, even from a child, I didn't like to visit out there much. And certainly when I got older, knowing...
There are tales that the town itself, some of the residents who lived back then, we're talking the early 1900s to the mid-1900s and that sort of thing, would actually help capture the boys if even they tried to escape for some of the goods that were grown on the farm. And those sort of stories are coming out of what happened. So it was kind of like, in some regard, people were aware of what was going on, but said nothing because they actually benefited from proceeds, according to reports.
Some things you heard people say, some things as a child I did get a chance to witness that. And I think we have a shot of that when you go down Marion Street at the bottom of the hill. There was two tall towers there, used to hold peanuts. But the old peanut shell building, that was where the peanut hulls would go in this, after they'd been down a belt, they would come over in this building. Well, that was, in the wintertime, that was a place to be nice and warm. And when you were nice and warm, you could rest a while if you was running, because most time, you remember, boys weren't just from Mariana or Quincy or Pensacola. These boys from Jackson, at one time you didn't have one school. They was from Jacksonville, Miami, Tampa. So if 5 boys from somewhere else decided to run, they would just run. They didn't know where to run. Sometimes they'd run right up in the arms of their cottage parents. But they would, if they made it down the railroad track, which wasn't far from the campus, and was able to make it to this shed, you know, they passed the news to each other, a good hideout. When you go in the shed and dig down the peanuts, that kept you warm, because most time they only had a T-shirt. They locked the jackets up, make sure they wouldn't be warm if they did decide to run. I actually saw them that was an old man caught about 5 or 6 of them. What he did, he closed the back door of the shed and closed the front, and then he called the police. And that morning about 7:30, we saw him coming out and being placed in police cars. Some people said they didn't get paid. They've denied that, and I'm not in a position that I want to argue the point. But I'm just telling you what I saw, and I was in my right mind. I saw him actually catching that.
And there are actually also tales from our previous Aware show from the gentlemen who say that they spent time detained at Dozier, that some of the boys were actually taken off the Dozier School's premises and taken to farm other people's property. So that was like slave labor.
That I think we mentioned that in one point here, that that's where the notion come, as they describe in the place, brutal treatments and slave. That is where that come from. People did take those boys off campus. They did.
Do you have anything? I'm sorry.
That was all of this we're talking about was before the fence was put up. The fence was put up after the incident with Bobby M. That was before.
There had even been stories told that some boys were let loose and purposely hunted down. I mean, I'm just telling the allegations of what was going on there.
Young man that was a minister, he just died. He said the worst thing could happen is that you were crazy enough to decide to run, and the dog boys had a place right about where you did that shot, looking up to those 2 pipes where the laundry. I showed you where the laundry was.
Yes.
It was a little section up there right to the right. That's where the dog boards. Dog boards usually came from with the local prison, and they were trustees, so they would be housed there. And if the boys ran 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, it made them very angry. So the boys all told the story of how they would get almost to you. They're supposed to hold the dogs. They would turn them loose.
Oh my goodness.
And that was quite a incident.
Mr. Jennings, do you have anything you want to add from the historical perspective?
I just want to make a comment, though, reference to all of this. And like I told you before, I'm not from Mariana, but when I got involved in this whole plot, it's been a chilling effect and a learning experience for me throughout, and it's sometimes beyond belief. And I'm going to talk a little just for the viewer's sake, because we referenced this White House, and it took me a while to grasp the White House, what it was primarily used for, and why it was called the White House, and why you never wanted to go to the White House.
Okay.
Well, now, we had the black boys didn't get noted for any credit about the White House because, see, they really had their own punishment place on the black campus.
And that area right,
that clear.
Yeah, that area right now is dilapidated and completely torn down.
We drove up far as we
drove
could
up
to
and
it, and I pointed out to you where it was because I actually got a chance to do sub work over there one day, and I knew that was where the locker was. Well, when they integrated the school, they built a nice brick building all on the white campus for lockup, and the White House always where it was. But there wasn't no black boys over at the White House then. They could take you over there, and when it came close to so that we were going to have to integrate the school. But they had their own place right up there on that right where you would be taken up there. And this old man told the story, how many times he had been taken in there and almost beat to an inch of his life.
And I guess what you're asking, Mr. Jennings, is specifically, which we did tell in the Aware Part 1 of this, that the White House was the place where the white boys were taken, and now some of them claim that, yes, that they were severely punished, tortured, beaten, and some of them even murdered at the White House.
A punishment house,
and see,
nothing.
The old man, he wasn't talking about what he heard. Mm-hmm. He was talking about what, and pointed out, and I knew it was there. And I knew the person who was over that department.
And what did they call the area where the black boys on the black side where they were beaten?
They didn't have a name until they started mentioning the White House.
Okay.
Where the black boys went, it was just a place to be beat.
I got you.
And it didn't gain any popularity.
Okay. You also took us to an area when we were on location where the graves were found around trees. Can you quickly explain that? Because we've got a gentleman who's going to be joining us by telephone in just a moment to talk about where we are now and where we're going with this investigation. But I just want to make sure we give a little historical background about some of the videos that we were able to get.
We've learned a lot with NACP members have been there 2 or 3 times. The old lawyers have been there.
Yes. What's at that grave site?
And what's in that site? What we learned is that in most black areas where the cemeteries are, there seem to be cedar trees. And if you notice around this thing, I don't think they would have volunteered like that, but the complete area is outlined as cedar trees. And the Dr. Erin has marked off some of it, and she dug in this area. But she also did
Dr. Erin, talking about from the University of South Florida, who's been excavating and exhuming
and we got to be
skeletal remains. So that's the cedar tree. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to give our viewers an idea of what we're talking about here with Dr. Erin and what she's been doing with the University of South Florida. But getting back to the circle sort of like of what's going on with the cedar trees and where the bodies or the skeletal remains have been found. Tell us the significance of that.
Well, never in my life had I learned that how she used the machines to see if the earth has been disturbed. And you can tell, I don't care how you try to plant it back, she has the machine, she can dig and she can tell what was there, how long ago it was, and so many things to learn. But that was fascinating to me because then I started riding through the rural area looking at some of the rural churches. So that must be a thing that the cedar trees usually are located around burial places. And that's all that was kept clean up to where we were then.
So
growing up.
Has it been understood whether the bodies or the skeletal remain, the boys were buried under the trees or whether the trees were planted after they were?
Evidently, the trees were there all the time.
Okay, so they would take them out and possibly bury them there.
Because she would tie a ribbon around the tree if she found a place that she was interested in digging.
And we now know that more than 50 skeletal remains have been found.
And you also know that the place where the crosses were that kept appeared in the paper, the cross was in perfect shape, in perfect lines. A lot of those places, there was nothing there in there. We found out that they were placed there years later by some Boy Scouts who wanted to do a good thing and place them there out of respect. But there was no name, nothing on it, but just a piece of iron welded to another piece of iron and down in the ground.
Okay. I want to come to you, Mr. Jennings, and we're going to be joined by another gentleman by phone in just a moment to bring us up to date with where we are now. Where are we now with what's going on with the NAACP and looking into what has happened at the Dozier School for Boys?
I think it may be appropriate, though, if we ask Mr. Dale that question, because what I would tell you is what I've been told by Mr. Landers and others as they look at and have conversation around the disposition of those remains that you talked about, working with the governor, cabinet, and other interest groups like USF and the CFO and the Attorney General and the FBI's and the County Commission, all those people. So I think Mr. Landers is going to be able to clarify a lot of that, because he in Tallahassee is working with the governor, cabinets, and all these other interest parties to talk about the disposition of where we go from here with the remains that we have been located. So I would refer to him on that.
Let's get to that right now then. We are
let me say one comment before you.
Go ahead, Mr. Bryant.
Thank you for that. People will ask, why is this television outfit coming way to Miranda to take pictures? Why are they doing this on we going way to Pensacola to do this? Why Dr. Fraser and Dee Dee Shop came to Marietta and they outtake? Because we want to know, just like the Jews continue to tell the story of the Holocaust, then we want to continue to tell the story of what happened at Dozier. And I appreciate you coming to Marietta, Dog.
Thank you.
And the gentleman that was taking the picture, he did excellent. He was so patient. And Dr. Fraser, thank y'all for coming to Marietta, because we want the story told. The NAACP's position is we want to bring closure.
I got you.
And we're not trying to take any sides.
The thing now about Marietta, you've been a mayor of Marietta, and you've been very active, very, very busy in the community for years, Mr. Bryant. We thank you for your years of service. Tell us what Marietta is like now before we go to our guest standing by on the telephone here, Mr. Dale Landry, Florida State Conference NAACP Criminal Justice Committee. We'll get to him in just a moment, but just a picture right quick, a snapshot of Marietta now.
Marietta is, we've seen the negative parts of Dozier, but Marietta have a lot to be proud of. Number one, I'm the first black mayor. When you come to the federal prison, my name's on the deed. First black man to do some things like that in the Panhandle. When you look at the shopping malls down there at Winn-Dixie, the vote was 2-2. I'm responsible for being there. When you look at the Florida Public Utilities, how big they are and all the jobs they offer, the vote was 2-2. I broke the tie. When you look at Sangamon District, nowhere else in the state of Florida, and I want your viewers to remember that, nowhere else where a black man drew the line. I drew my districts because the city went in default. Now, where's the city now? We were able to bring the city back together because we just had a meeting last week And what we really would like to see, I would like to see, and I've had a lot of amens on that, is that we'd like to see that land utilized as our future school, one of our future schools. All that beautiful land, and there's nothing wrong with it, but we got that old mentality of a stigma, a few of us. But the businessmen are ready to move forward.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Bryant. And certainly now we want to go to the gentleman who we've had standing by on the line now for us. That is Mr. Dale Landry. He's with the Florida State Conference and NAACP Criminal Justice Committee. Thank you, Mr. Landry, for being so very patient and joining us for the Aware Show. Want to get to you and talk to you about, in the first part of this program that we highlighted, two gentlemen who were students at this school, and now again on the Aware Show with Mr. Bryant and Mr. Jennings with the NAACP. Something brought up between the shows has been reparations for the young boys, now turned men, who suffered needlessly at this school that they were supposed to go to and actually be reformed. Can you tell where we are now with that, and or where we may be with the investigation going on at the school, Mr. Landry?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. First of all, if I may, and let me get you to that point, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because you asked several questions.
Yes,
First
I
of all,
did.
I want to say thank you again on behalf of the Florida State Conference and NAACP, and on behalf of our state president, Adora Obi and Weezy, and our executive committee at the state level. A couple of things that I want to, for the record, how I got involved in this, and I got involved with it when the University of South Florida asked the NAACP to come in and get involved because they were having problems over there trying to get the work done at the site, and the state was stopping them. And we received a phone call from Dr. Kimberly, and in turn, I called the state president, and she directed me way back, I guess, in when they first got ready to go in. She directed me because they were actually being blocked by elements of people, and it's a small group of people in Mariana that did not want that site dug up. And they wanted to be left alone because they were getting ready to sell that property. All of it, and if you had a chance to visit it and see it, they were selling all of it for $300,000. Now, the fence alone is worth over $300,000. But more importantly, there was a prison on the facility that was just built in the 1990s. That was built for about $5 million, and that was about to go into that $300,000. So I want to make sure we're clear of how the NAACP first got involved, and it was from that standpoint that we came in, got involved with Dr. Kimberly, and we're moving forward. And at the same time, because of that, the state president had me to interview several of the people that were there, because you asked some questions about some of the horrors that happened to the black men, and they did share some of that stuff with me as a part of my involvement. But I wanted to make sure we had clarity. That's how the NAACP got involved. And way back then, and I want to say that was about 2000 and I would have to go to Dr. Kimberly. That was before they even broke ground. That was when, and it wasn't Robert Straley. There was another gentleman, Gene. I don't have his name here, but he was the actual motivation behind this, because he was the one that got the Attorney General to get involved, and it was the Attorney General that called and asked us to go in, and as Mr. Bryant said, that we came in and went in and met in Mariana and spoke out about giving them the opportunity to go ahead and dig, even though, again, they were asking the county. It was not the county's position to give permission, it was the state's. And after, again, getting involved at the state level with the cabinet, specifically with the chief financial officer, CFO, along with the attorney general, and we were able to get the commissioner of agriculture to join in, and then ultimately the governor. That was how we were able to go ahead and get the move to allow them to go in and dig into the site. But throughout that whole period, there was a small element in Mariana that was in opposition, and ultimately we were able to get in and help Dr. Kimberly go ahead and excavate the grave.
With the University of
So I
South
wanted to
Florida.
get us in that place. You asked a couple of questions about the African Americans and what did they go through. As Elmo had said, they met with us under the tree. The gentleman talked about some of the most wickedest sodomization I have ever heard of in my life, to include being sodomized with chemicals. They spoke to rapes. They spoke to being beaten. And one of the places that Elmo was talking about, that was the place over there, it was actually supposed to be, I think it's a small building, a very small building. Mm-hmm. But in this building, they put 7 black boys. And they put them in there for a period of time. One of them died. And they made the 7 boys stay in this, and it was about 7 foot. It was very much like a small room, but it was a shed. And they kept them locked up in there with a bucket used among all of them as a toilet. And they all had to share it along with the dead child. And I forget how long they kept him in there with them. They would not open the door and let them out, but they kept the 7. One died, and they made them stay in there with the dead body. I forget how many days until they ultimately got them out. So on that side, you did have them to go through some of the worst horrors anyone can imagine. And then they transferred them over and started doing the same thing to them over on the south side. A lot of the sodomization you asked about were done in the tunnels. Underneath Dozier are tunnels. And based on the research done by Dr. Kimberly, that is where they sodomized a lot of the boys. They would take them down underneath, and they had actually what they call the weight room that they had where these boys were taken into underneath Dozier. It's the heating elements underneath Dozier. So that's a little bit of that background stuff you were asking about as it relates to the reparations. They have already, the state, they tried to go in for reparations. That has already been denied. They tried to do it legally.
Go ahead.
And for what it's worth, they could not get reparations, and they tried in the federal courts, and the federal courts said they had to go to the state courts, and it was my understanding they came back and they denied it.
They're told from Robert Straley and Andrew Pugh, they have been also asking the state if there would be an opportunity to open up the records of some of these boys, black boys in particular, who went to the school, because there are not a lot of well-kept records as to who these boys were. So it's kind of hard to know who's missing and who's not when you don't know who they are. So they've been asking the state to open up those records, even though they're supposed to be sealed by state law, I guess, for 50 years.
No, you don't have that problem based on my research and talking with Dr. Kimberly.
Okay.
And the pursuit that they went into trying to research that information. A lot of that information, you got to remember, again, when we start talking about records repositories, a lot of those records during the era that you're questioning were maintained and kept out at Dozier.
Okay.
And Dozier had a couple of serious incidents that happened. One was fire. But the second part was the old administration building where those records were kept at is still standing. And they went in, we went in, and the NAACP, based on the request of Dr. Kimberly, went in and worked with the DJJ and with the state. And where those records are is in this old administration building.
Okay,
that old
we're going to have to wrap up on time
is
here.
A hazard. And what has happened is, what do you call it, the black mold?
Yes.
It has infested all of those records. I mean, their files, they were open, they were left, and they have become contaminated to the point that I think unless someone wants to pay for it, the state's not going to pay for it.
Okay. Well, we've got to move along here because we've only got a minute or two left, and I have at least one more question for you. I want to ask you about Mr. Landry.
Yes.
The bodies that we've been told now, some of those bodies have been identified. There is right now work underway, I guess, from the University of South Florida to locate family members and or see how they want to lay these skeletal remains to rest for once and for all, and or who would pay for it? What can you tell us about what goes on
We're going to
now?
have a meeting in the near future with the cabinet. They have discussed that at the last cabinet meeting. I will be meeting with several of the cabinet members along with a ministerial group. And from the NAACP perspective, we're working with them to look at what and how do we want to handle those remains.
Okay.
They will stay at the University of South Florida until such time as we've had that meeting. And the cabinet voted in their last meeting was to let it fall under the Secretary of State, but they delayed the vote on that until we can get ready to come to the next meeting, give us time to strategize and talk, and then we're going in to talk about a plan of what we want to do with not only the bodies, but also with what we're going to do with the remand, with Dozier, the school itself.
Very good. Thank you once again. Dale Landry, chairman of the Florida State Conference NAACP Criminal Justice Committee, joining us by phone on The Aware Show. And we may have you back on at another time. Thank you so much for joining us by phone and sharing that important information with us. Back here in the studio.
Welcome.
Thank you. Back here in the studio again, Elmore Bryant, former mayor, former employee at Dozier, and of course, Mr. Jennings with the NAACP Area 1 and 2. Thank you all for joining us here in the studio.
Thank you for having us.
Just a last remark from you, Mr. Bryant, before we wrap up here. You've got less than 30 seconds.
My one remark would be in Mariana is to let's move forward. There's not one of us as great as all of us. It's going to take a community effort, and I think we're ready to do that.
Okay, very good. Mr. Jennings?
And likewise, I'd like to thank you and Dr. Frazier, because I believe in one phrase, things that get measured get done. So the fact that you all are involved and you are looking into this give me confidence that something will get done. Things that get measured get done.
Especially being able to make people aware of what's going on. And as I've mentioned, right here in our own backyard, we all have a vested interest in trying to get this done, bringing closure, if you will, to family and to the city of Mariana in order for it to heal for once and for all, and also to bring these boys' stories out and give them all closure, the ones who are still alive to speak and for those who are no longer with us for one reason or another. Thank you once again for joining us for The Aware Show. We appreciate the work that you have done on the front lines. We certainly appreciate your time that you've shared with us, Mr. Bryant, in bringing the story to The Aware Show. All right. Well, the last chapter in the story about Dozier has yet to be told, and it has yet to be written for that matter. The investigation into Dozier, once the largest reformatory school in the United States, continues. We know that right now, the University of South Florida has released a 119-page report citing 50 graves have been found. The final report will be released in January 2016. In the meantime, Senator Bill Nelson has called for the Justice Department to investigate what really happened at Dozier. AWARE is continuing to look for African Americans who were incarcerated at Dozier. Many of their stories are told in a book called The Dark Days at Dozier Reform School: Rapes, Murders, Beatings, and Slavery. And of course, we will keep you updated about this continuing story at Dozier School for Boys in Mariana, Florida.
Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.